Dr. Anya Sharma adjusted the simple, dark blazer over her crisp white blouse, the fabric feeling stiff and unfamiliar against her skin. She preferred the comfortable, practical scrubs of her lab, or the worn softness of her favorite research hoodie. Today, however, called for a different kind of uniform. The air outside the gleaming glass and steel edifice of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, hummed with a palpable excitement, a stark contrast to the quiet, sterile precision of her daily world. A brilliant May morning, the sun glinting off the polished surfaces of luxury sedans, felt far too cheerful for the occasion ahead. This was not her stage, not her triumph, but a familiar prelude to a long-standing, deeply personal betrayal. She found a parking space amidst a sea of expensive cars, each one a testament to the success of those gathered within. As she walked towards the imposing entrance, she watched them. The proud, impeccably dressed families, their postures straight, their faces beaming with a vicarious glow of achievement. They strolled across the immaculate green lawns, their sons and daughters, brilliant medical professionals, renowned clinicians, and groundbreaking surgeons, embodying a legacy of visible, public-facing success. A quiet, complicated knot of pride for her younger brother, Dr. Rohan Sharma, tightened in Anya's chest. It was a feeling she had learned to temper over the years, to shield with a well-worn layer of resignation. She knew her role today. It was a part she had been playing for 15 years, a well-rehearsed performance as the supportive older sister, the quiet footnote in the grand story of the family hero. She was a shadow, a name whispered in the background, a brilliant mind relegated to the periphery of their understanding. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Anya steeled herself to once again play the part of the sister with the lab job. At the main security checkpoint, she presented her ID. The young security guard, his jaw set with the seriousness of his post, took her identification. He was all professionalism until his eyes scanned the guest list on his tablet. He looked up at her, a crease of confusion forming between his brows. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said, his voice polite but firm, trained to be unwavering. "I don't have a Dr. Anya Sharma on the guest list for Dr. Rohan Sharma's ceremony." He turned the tablet screen toward her, a gesture of proof that the error was not his. The list he had read each name with military precision. Dr. Vijay Sharma, Mrs. Leela Sharma, and Mrs. Priya Sharma, Dr. Sharma's wife. Each one was a small, sharp hammer blow against Anya's ribs. The absence of her own name was louder than any of theirs. This was not a clerical error. This was not an oversight. This was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. As if summoned by the thought, the gleaming, ostentatious black SUV her family favored pulled up to the gate, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. The door opened, and Rohan emerged, looking every inch the conquering hero in his perfectly tailored suit, the fabric seemingly radiating its own light against his tanned skin. He saw Anya standing there, saw the guard's apologetic stance, and a slow, knowing smirk, the kind of victory only a lifelong rival can truly savor, played on his lips. Instead of stepping forward to vouch for his own sister, to correct the obvious oversight, he leaned toward his wife, Priya, and said, his voice carrying with perfect clarity for both the guard and Anya to hear, "Probably some paperwork mix-up. She should have married a real doctor instead of playing with petri dishes." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Her mother, Leela, suddenly found the clasp of her antique pearl necklace to be the most fascinating object in the world, her hands fluttering in a theatrical gesture of avoidance. Her father, Vijay, a retired renowned cardiologist, simply scowled, his face a mask of deep, impatient annoyance, not for the insult hurled at his daughter, but for the public scene his daughter was causing. They didn't even look back. They walked past the checkpoint, leaving Anya behind as if she were a piece of luggage someone had misplaced, a lost item no one cared enough to claim. A hot, creeping blush that had nothing to do with the sun washed over Anya's face. Rohan's words were a slap, but her parents' silence was the true poison. It was complicity, It was the final, quiet confirmation of a lifetime of being told she was less. The young security guard, now trapped in this excruciating family drama, began to speak, his voice laced with professional discomfort. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Anya didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply stood there, her posture rigid, her spine a rod of ice, and watched them go. She watched them disappear into the hallowed halls that had rejected her on their command. And in that moment of profound public abandonment, the hurt didn't vanish. It simply crystallized. It cooled and hardened into something else entirely. A decision formed in her mind, as cold and hard as steel. Let them believe it. A dangerous calm settled over her. The storm inside her went still, its chaotic energy consolidating into a single sharp point of focus. Today's performance would be one for the ages. She would not shed a single tear. She would not give them that satisfaction. Standing there on the immaculate grounds of the NIH, an outcast at the gate, Anya felt the present moment dissolve. The sting of Rohan's words became a key, unlocking a vault of memories she had long kept under guard, buried beneath layers of professional detachment. The cool, controlled woman she was now faded, and in her place stood the ghost of a teenage girl, forever standing on the outside of a circle of light, looking in, yearning for acceptance. The memory that surfaced first was drenched in the smell of antiseptic and freshly brewed coffee, the scent of her parents' home, a constant backdrop to Rohan's triumphs. It was the day Rohan's acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins Medical School had arrived. Her father, Dr. Vijay Sharma, a man who rarely showed emotion beyond a stoic nod or a stern frown, had transformed. He'd thrown a massive backyard barbecue, inviting what felt like every prominent doctor and medical researcher within a 50-mile radius. He stood by the grill, tongs in one hand and a glass of expensive single malt in the other, his voice booming with a pride he never used for Anya. He draped an arm around Rohan's shoulders and introduced him again and again as the heir to the Sharma medical legacy, the future of their family's distinguished lineage. Later, her mother, Leela, brought out a huge sheet cake from the local bakery, the kind with overly sweet frosting and airbrushed decorations. In bold, triumphant letters, it read, "Congratulations, future chief of surgery." The whole world, it seemed, had stopped spinning for this one moment. It wasn't just a party. It was a coronation, a public declaration of the chosen son. And Anya, his older sister, was just a commoner in the crowd, a spectator at a ceremony held in her own backyard. She smiled, she clapped, and she felt utterly and completely invisible, a phantom in her own home. The universe, Anya mused, has a cruel sense of irony. That very same week, she had won a National Science Fair award. Her project, a complex study on gene editing for rare genetic disorders, had been recognized as one of the most promising in the country. A groundbreaking piece of theoretical work. She remembered holding the award in her hands, a heavy, gold-plated medal on a thick ribbon. For a few hours, she had allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps this, she thought, would be enough. Perhaps this tangible proof of her intellectual prowess, her unique contribution, would finally earn her a place in their esteemed narrative. She found her father in his study that evening, reading a medical journal, his brow furrowed in concentration. She approached him tentatively, the way a child offers a drawing, her heart pounding with a desperate primal need for his approval. "Dad," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. I won." She held out the medal. He took it, his eyes barely leaving his journal. He glanced down at the intricate engraving, his expression unchanging. "Good job, sweetie," he murmured, the words automatic, devoid of any real warmth or genuine interest. He handed it back to her, then folded his journal. "I was just thinking Rohan is going to need a serious regimen to get ready for his pre-med summer program. He needs to build stamina." And just like that, the moment was over. The subject, as always, had returned to Rohan. The gold medal in Anya's hand suddenly felt heavy, not with the weight of achievement, but with the dead weight of disappointment. Its shine seemed to dim under the fluorescent lights of their living room. Later that night, alone in her bedroom, Anya opened an old wooden box where she kept forgotten things: childhood trinkets, faded letters, a pressed flower from a forgotten picnic. She placed the metal inside, nestled it between a dried corsage and a silver dollar from her grandfather. And she closed the lid. It became a secret she kept from the world, a silent, painful reminder that her victories, no matter how significant in her own world, were simply invisible in theirs. That feeling of invisibility crystallized a few years later. On the evening, she told them her own career choice. She had gathered all her courage to announce that she had been accepted into the prestigious Aegis Biosolutions Research Program, a highly selective institute known for its cutting-edge, often classified, work in genetic therapies. Her father muted the television, his face hardening into the mask of disapproval she knew so well. He stared at her across the coffee table, his silence more intimidating than any shout. "Aegis Biosolutions?" he finally said, the name tasting like an insult on his tongue. "That's a lab, Sophia. It's for academics, for people who can't handle the pressures of clinical practice. The Sharma family are not lab rats." Her mother, Leela, ever the peacekeeper, jumped in with a placating smile. "Now, VJ," she'd said softly, laying a hand on his arm. "Perhaps it's safer for her that way. Less stress, dear." Her words were meant to be a comfort, but they were a dagger. Safer for her. The implication was clear. Anya was weak, fragile, in need of protection, not suited for the real, glorious, public-facing work that men like her father and brother were born for. They didn't see her choice as strategic, as a different kind of warfare fought with intellect and analysis, pushing the boundaries of scientific understanding. They saw it only as a deviation from the path of glory they had laid out, a quiet failure to uphold the family tradition. That dismissal, that ingrained prejudice, was the foundation upon which her entire career was built. Their dismissal was the fuel. The quiet, burning resentment from 1,000 tiny cuts had forged a resolve in her that they could never understand. "And my family thinks I play with petri dishes. They picture me in a sterile government lab, a beige cubicle filled with microscopes. My greatest daily challenge, a stubborn centrifuge. The bitter irony is that they're not entirely wrong about the sterile part. They just have no concept of what that sterility truly contains. They know nothing of the place we call the core. A fortified facility buried deep underground, shielded from any form of electronic eavesdropping, a veritable fortress of scientific secrecy. The air is cold, recycled, and carries the low, constant hum of powerful servers and advanced genetic sequencing machines. There are no windows. The only light comes from the giant curved wall of screens in front of me, a mosaic of glowing molecular models, cascading lines of genetic code, and real-time biometric data. This was my office. This was my battlefield. I remember one particular night, a Tuesday that bled into a Wednesday. The air in the core was thick with tension. You could almost taste the fear, the desperation. We were coordinating a high-risk counter-bio-threat operation. A new, highly aggressive viral strain had emerged in a remote region, threatening to become a global pandemic. A dozen lives in a quarantined medical facility hung in the balance, their immune systems failing rapidly. My team of bioanalysts fed me data streams in a quiet, focused rhythm, their voices low and steady in my earpiece. My job was to see the whole board, to connect the dots faster than the virus could mutate, faster than it spread. Team Alpha. Confirm genetic markers. We need a precise sequence match on the capsid protein. Time is critical, I said into my headset, my voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline pumping through my veins. On the main screen, a holographic projection showed a complex, swirling molecular structure, its intricate patterns shifting. Eagle Eye. Give me real-time replication rates. I need a predictive model for its airborne transmission. The image sharpened. Replication rate accelerating, Dr. Sharma. Transmission model shows exponential growth within 72 hours if unchecked. The lives of thousands, potentially millions, depended on my next series of commands, on my ability to process and predict the virus's behavior. This wasn't a spreadsheet. This was a high-stakes chess match where the pawns were human lives, and I was the one moving the most important pieces across the board. It was in that moment of peak concentration, as I was about to give the green light on a risky experimental gene therapy, that my personal cell phone, tucked away in my pocket, vibrated. It was a jarring, unwelcome intrusion from another world, a sudden, dissonant note in the symphony of scientific urgency. For a split second, I considered ignoring it, but protocol was protocol. A personal call during a critical operation was a breach, and I needed to address it. I pulled it out. It was a text from Rohan. The message glowed on the small screen, a beacon of casual ignorance from a world away. "Enjoying your weekend in the lab, sis? Hitting the microscopes, I bet? Don't work too hard on those reports, Anya." I read the words, and a cold, bitter wave of irony washed over me. Here I was, in a life-or-death struggle against a global bio-threat, my mind stretched to its absolute limit, making decisions that would impact humanity. And in his world, I was his boring older sister, a tourist in my own life, drowning in paperwork, playing with petri dishes. The condescending nickname sis felt like a final twist of the knife. I took a breath, my fingers tightening on the phone for a second before I thumbed the power button, plunging the screen into darkness. I slipped it back into my pocket. My focus snapped back to the curved wall of screens, my voice emerging colder and sharper than before. "Team Alpha, stand by," I commanded, my eyes catching a flicker of movement on a secondary feed. A small, obscure data anomaly, a subtle shift in a viral marker that wasn't on any known database. It was a ghost. Eagle Eye, focus on that anomaly now. Give me a full sequence breakdown. The thermal image zoomed in. The anomaly was minute, almost imperceptible, but the implications were not. "It's a new mutation, Dr. Sharma." My analyst's voice crackled in my ear, a highly resistant variant. "It's adapting to our proposed therapy." A new wave of adrenaline, cold and sharp, surged through me. "Abort! Abort gene therapy protocol. I repeat, abort. We have a new variant. It's walking us into a resistance trap." A wave of relief, silent and profound, washed through the room as my team confirmed the new orders. My analysis in that split second had just saved thousands of lives from a potentially catastrophic therapy-resistant mutation. Hours later, at 3 a.m., I finally returned to my empty apartment in Washington, D.C. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. The city lights twinkled through my window, a galaxy of strangers, none of whom knew what had just transpired in the darkness on the other side of the world, or the classified facility beneath their feet. I walked to the liquor cabinet, my movements heavy, and poured a generous 2 fingers of Kentucky bourbon into a heavy glass. No ice. I stood by the window, swirling the amber liquid. The silence of the room a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of my work. I thought about the men and women of Team Alpha, colleagues whose faces I would never see outside the core, whose thanks I would never hear. I thought about the string of scientific breakthroughs attributed to anonymous research units. Solitude was the price of this silent power. My family thought I pushed paper, played with petri dishes. They had no idea that those petri dishes held the fates of nations, that the genetic code I manipulated could save populations and shift the balance of global health. They saw a lab job. I saw a global chessboard, and I had long ago accepted the terms of my service. I accepted the loneliness, the secrecy, the crushing weight of it all, because the mission was always more important than a wounded ego. Chapter 4. The Unexpected Summons. Hope arrived when I least expected it, not in a blaze of glory, but in the quiet of a corner office in the Pentagon. It smelled of worn leather, old books, and freshly brewed coffee. A comforting blend that felt strangely out of place in the sterile, high-stakes environment of classified research. 2 days after the Red Sea operation, 2 days after Rohan's dismissive text message had sliced through the tension of the core, I was summoned by Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Reed was not just my commanding officer. She was the director of Aegis Bio Solutions, a visionary leader with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was tough, a titan in the world of biotechnology. Her office overlooked the Potomac River, and the walls were covered not with medals, but with complex scientific diagrams and photographs of her with researchers in the field, a testament to her hands-on approach. She gestured for me to sit as she walked over to a coffee machine humming quietly in the corner. "Anya, you look exhausted," she said, her back to me, her use of my first name unusual, a sign that this was not a formal debriefing. She turned around and handed me a heavy ceramic mug filled with steaming black coffee. It was a simple gesture, but in the context of my life, where personal acknowledgement was a rarity, it felt monumental. She sat down behind her large mahogany desk and looked at me, her gaze direct and piercing, yet completely devoid of judgment. It was the kind of look that made you feel seen, truly seen, not just as a subordinate or a set of skills, but as a person, a whole human being. "You saved thousands of lives the other night," she stated, her voice a low, steady rumble, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "And you averted a global pandemic. The official report won't have your name on it for obvious reasons, given the classified nature of your work, but I know, and the president knows." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes holding mine, a silent acknowledgement of the immense responsibility I carried. "You should be profoundly proud of that, Anya." I stared at her, the warmth from the coffee mug seeping into my cold hands, thawing the numbness that had become a constant companion. For a moment, I couldn't speak. In my world, praise was a foreign language, a concept so alien that my mind struggled to process it. The idea of being seen for what I did, for the tangible impact of my work, rather than what I failed to be in my family's eyes, was so astonishing that my mind struggled to process it. I felt a crack form in the icy facade I had so carefully constructed around myself, a hairline fracture in the armor of my self-imposed invisibility. I wasn't Dr. Vijay Sharma's daughter. I wasn't Rohan's overshadowed sister. In this room, with this woman, I was just Anya. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. Dr. Reed let the silence hang for a moment, allowing her words to land, to resonate in the quiet space. Then she continued. "The National Science Board has been discussing Project Chimera. It's been long enough. We believe parts of it can now be declassified." I blinked, my mind racing. Project Chimera. It was my masterpiece. A multi-year genetic therapy campaign that had dismantled a global network of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, a silent killer threatening public health. It was the work I was proudest of. The culmination of years of relentless research and groundbreaking innovation. And it was buried under layers of the highest security clearance, known only to a select few. "The decision has been made," she said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of her mouth. "It's time we started recognizing our heroes in the shadows. The Department of Health and Human Services has officially nominated you for the Presidential Medal for Scientific Innovation." I felt the air leave my lungs. The Presidential Medal for Scientific Innovation. It was one of the highest non-combat honors, a recognition reserved for senior scientists and researchers who displayed exceptionally meritorious service in a position of great responsibility, whose work had a profound impact on the nation. I was stunned into silence, my mind reeling. She began to speak about my career, referencing specific operations, strategic successes, and analytical breakthroughs, accomplishments I had locked away in classified files, accomplishments even I had almost forgotten in the relentless churn of the next mission. She saw the whole picture, the entire tapestry of my career, not just the disconnected, meaningless threads my family perceived. An unfamiliar emotion swelled in my throat, a mixture of gratitude and a fragile, nascent hope. On impulse, driven by the unexpected safety of this space, I heard myself confess the one thing I never spoke of, the deep-seated wound that had defined so much of my life. Doctor. Reed, I said, my voice barely a whisper, raw with vulnerability. My own family. They think I have a desk job. They think I play with petri dishes. I expected a nod of sympathy, perhaps a look of pity, a quiet understanding of my plight. Instead, Dr. Reed leaned back in her chair and let out a deep, booming laugh. It wasn't a laugh of ridicule. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated delight, of someone who appreciated a grand cosmic irony. A desk job? She roared, shaking her head in disbelief, her eyes twinkling with a sudden brilliant idea. Well then, she leaned forward again, her gaze sharp and intelligent. In that case, I think we ought to give them the biggest surprise of their lives. She paused, letting the idea form, a master strategist, seeing a new, unexpected move on the board. Your brother's awards ceremony is next month, isn't it? At the National Medical Center. I nodded, confused, my mind still trying to catch up. And how poetic would it be, she said, her smile widening, to recognize two of Dr. Sharma's children on the same day, for two very different but equally vital forms of service to this nation's health. Her words landed in the silent, barren landscape of my hope and bloomed. A wild, audacious idea took root in my mind. The thought that my truth, my real story, could finally be brought into the light, not by my own desperate explanations, but by the undeniable, official recognition of the highest scientific authorities in the United States. The thought was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. The seed of hope Dr. Reed had planted felt fragile, a delicate green shoot in the barren soil of my heart. My memory, however, a far more cynical and experienced gardener, immediately conjured the ghost of the last family gathering, a suffocating reminder of why such hope was a dangerous thing to entertain. The scene replayed in my mind like a worn-out home movie, a tableau of quintessential American perfection. My parents' sprawling backyard in suburban Virginia, heavy with the smoky, savory scent of gourmet burgers and artisanal hot dogs, sizzling on my father's oversized gas grill. An American flag, Old Glory herself, waving proudly from a pole on the porch, its colors vibrant against the summer sky. A large blue Coleman cooler sweating in the afternoon sun, packed with cans of imported craft beer and sparkling water. It was a picture-perfect Rockwellian painting of family and patriotism, and as always, I was just part of the background scenery, a detail to make the composition feel complete. The true focus, the sun around which our entire family solar system was forced to orbit, was Rohan. He held court on the freshly stained deck, a beer in hand, regaling a rapt audience of family, friends, and medical colleagues with a tale from his last medical mission trip to a remote village in Africa. It was a good story, I had to admit, full of harrowing medical emergencies, selfless acts of compassion, and split-second decisions that saved lives. It was also about 80% fiction. I knew this because I had read the official after-action report, a document so classified that its existence was a secret, detailing the logistical challenges and the collaborative efforts of a larger team. I knew that in the real event, he was a supporting character, a competent doctor who did his job. But here, on his stage, under the adoring gaze of our father, he had given himself the starring role, the lone hero. My dad, his face beaming with a vicarious pride that was almost painful to watch, would nod along, interjecting with technical details about surgical procedures or diagnostic protocols, lending his own authoritative weight to the embellished narrative. It was a play, a tired, predictable one. They had been performing for my entire life, and I was, as always, the unwilling audience member, contractually obligated by blood to applaud a performance I knew was a fraud. Later, while my father and Rohan were deep in a debate about healthcare policy, my mother, Leela, caught my arm with a gentle but firm grip. "Come help me in the kitchen for a minute, dear," she said, her voice bright and conspiratorial. This was her signature move, the gentle summons to a private space for a not so gentle, soul-crushing critique. In the cool of the kitchen, She pulled a large bowl of her classic potato salad from the refrigerator, her back to me as she fussed with the plastic wrap. "You see Priya out there?" she began, her tone meticulously casual, as if she were discussing the weather. "She just knows how to take care of Rohan. She makes his life so easy when he's home. It's a real gift, you know." She turned to face me then, her smile a carefully constructed mask of maternal concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A career is a wonderful thing, Anya. We're very proud of you, of course. But you mustn't forget about your own happiness." And I braced myself. I knew what was coming next. My friend Carol from the book club, her son Mark. He's an orthopedic surgeon, you know, very successful, very handsome. And he's finally single again. I was just thinking. And I let her words wash over me, each one a tiny, perfectly aimed dart. It wasn't about my happiness. It was a judgment. It was a quiet, firm declaration that my life, the one I had sacrificed and fought for, the one I had painstakingly built for myself in the shadows of classified research, was fundamentally incomplete. My career, in her eyes, was not a source of pride or fulfillment, but a temporary placeholder, a waiting room for the only event that truly mattered in a woman's life: marriage. I wasn't a success. I was a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up in a neat matrimonial bow with a doctor. "And that's very thoughtful of you, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly even, a testament to years of practice. "But I'm happy." The lie felt thin and brittle in the air between us. When we returned to the patio, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the lawn. Rohan, now 3 beers in, was louder, his confidence amplified by the alcohol and the fawning audience. He spotted me and, with a boisterous laugh, draped a heavy, familiar arm over my shoulders. His gesture was a prelude to an attack, disguised as brotherly affection. "Hey, sis," he said, his voice overly jovial. He pulled me a little closer, forcing the small group of his friends and our parents to pay attention. "I've been meaning to ask you," he paused for dramatic effect. "When are you going to put in for a transfer to a real position?" The question landed in the suddenly quiet circle like a grenade. "I mean," he continued, either oblivious or indifferent to the sudden tension, "somewhere you can actually make a difference. Must be pretty damn boring sitting in that lab all day, playing with petri dishes." And there it was, the annual public dismissal of my entire life's work. In front of everyone, he had reduced my career, my sacrifices, my secret victories, and crushing responsibilities to nothing. A boring, meaningless waste of time. He wasn't just asking a question. He was passing a verdict. I felt it then. A wall of ice beginning to form around my heart, a defense mechanism I had perfected over decades. It started at my core and spread outwards, a cold, crystalline barrier against the casual, smiling cruelty of his words. On the outside, I held my own smile in place. It was a polite, placid, utterly empty expression. "I like my work, Rohan," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of calm. But inside, behind that wall, I felt a fundamental shift. The ice, which for years had been just a shield, was now becoming something else. It was getting higher, thicker. It was no longer just a defense. It was becoming a fortress. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was very, very close to reaching its peak. Have you ever had a moment where time seems to slow down, where the world narrows to a single, hyper-focused point of humiliation? That was me, standing at the gate of the NIH, with the guard's polite, dismissive words hanging in the air. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." And it's the politeness that makes it worse, isn't it? The professional, dispassionate tone that says, "This isn't personal. I'm just doing my job," when everything about the situation feels deeply, excruciatingly personal. My feet felt like they were cemented to the asphalt. I was an exhibit in a zoo of my own family's making, trapped in the spotlight of their casual cruelty. And then, through the thick, suffocating air, a new sound emerged. It was the quiet, confident purr of an engine you only find in a government-issued black sedan. The car glided to a stop beside us, and when the rear door opened, Dr. Evelyn Reed emerged. She was in her full ceremonial uniform, a perfectly tailored dark suit adorned with subtle but significant pins and ribbons. In the bright morning sun, the insignia on her lapels seemed to burn with a light of their own. You know a leader when you see one. It's in the way they stand. The way they survey a scene in a single, all-encompassing glance. She saw me. Frozen. She saw the flustered guard, and she saw my family watching from a distance, and she ignored them, as if they were part of the landscape. Her focus was a laser beam aimed directly at me, and when she smiled, it was with a genuine warmth that melted a fraction of the ice around my heart. "There you are, Dr. Sharma," she said, her voice carrying with an easy authority that could command entire research divisions. We were about to send out a search party. The words didn't just break the silence, they shattered it. Dr. Sharma. And you could almost physically see the gears grinding, and then stripping inside the young security officer's head. The stern mask of professionalism didn't just crack, it disintegrated. His face cycled through a series of emotions with comical speed. First, blank confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally, a wave of raw, unadulterated panic. His skin went pale. He had just been seconds away from physically ejecting a top-tier scientist, a presidential medal nominee, from a national event. He knew, and I knew, that in the rigid, unforgiving world of federal security, he had just stared into the abyss of his own career. "Dr. Sharma. Ma'am. My deepest, most sincere apologies," he stammered, his body snapping into a salute so sharp it was a miracle he didn't dislocate his shoulder. He practically threw himself at the gate controls, swinging the barrier open with a desperate, frantic urgency. It's amazing what a title can do, isn't it? The first jarring taste of a power I had earned in the shadows was now on full display in the sun. Dr. Reed placed a light, guiding hand on my elbow. She leaned in, her voice a low, protective murmur for my ears only. "Are you all right, Anya? Do I need to go have a word?" My gaze drifted past her shoulder to the three people who were my blood. They were staring, their mouths slightly agape. You've seen that look before, I'm sure. The look of utter, slack-jawed bewilderment when the world as you know it has just been turned completely upside down. The old Anya, the ghost of the girl who spent her life desperate for a scrap of their approval, screamed inside me to say, "Yes, yes, go over there. Make them see. Make them understand." But that girl had died on this very spot just a few minutes ago. I turned back to the director. The fortress of ice around my heart now complete. I gave a single, decisive shake of my head. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and colder than the recycled air in the core. "That won't be necessary, Dr. Reed. Thank you." I let my eyes sweep over my family one last time. I have a feeling they'll figure it out on their own today. This was it. The crossroads. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a confrontation. I would deny them the chance to prepare, to recalibrate, to craft a new performance of feigned, shocked pride. I wanted to see their unfiltered reactions. I wanted to watch them process the truth without any help from me. "As you wish, Dr. Sharma," Dr. Reed said. And the look in her eyes was one of pure, unadulterated respect. She straightened up and, with her hand still a firm, supportive presence on my elbow, began to escort me through the gate. She didn't just walk me in, she led me with purpose, on a direct path toward the reserved VIP seating at the front. Our route took us right past the row where my family sat. I kept my chin high. I kept my eyes fixed forward, on the podium, on the banner, on my future. I did not grant them a single glance, but I felt their gaze on me like a physical force. As we passed, I heard it, a choked, incredulous whisper from my father to my brother, "Dr. Sharma?" And that one word, spoken in a tone of utter disbelief by the man who had dismissed my life's work, was the final, echoing drop. A lifetime of slights flashed through my mind. The ignored metal, the condescending jokes, the endless gushing praise for Rohan's real service. Every moment of feeling invisible, of being told I wasn't enough. It all came to a head in that single whispered question. The last drop had fallen. The glass was not just full, it had shattered. Today was not about asking for their approval. That ship had sailed long ago, and I was finally letting go of the rope. Today was about forcing them to reckon with the truth they had so comfortably, so cruelly chosen to ignore. My silence was over, but my answer wouldn't be spoken. It would be worn. It was in the quiet confidence of my stride, and the unspoken authority that now radiated from me. Dr. Evelyn Reed led me to a private waiting room tucked away behind the main stage, a quiet sanctuary from the growing crowd. The room was simple, furnished with a few leather armchairs and a small table with a pitcher of ice water. She gave me a knowing nod. "Take a moment, Dr. Sharma. The ceremony begins in 15. Then she closed the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the faint, muffled sounds of the symphony orchestra tuning up outside. I walked over to the full-length mirror on the far wall. The woman looking back at me was a stranger and yet more myself than I had ever been. There was a nervous energy thrumming just beneath my skin, the familiar adrenaline rush that comes before a major operation. This was no different. This was a strategic maneuver, one that required careful, deliberate preparation. My hands moved with practiced precision. I slipped off the beige trench coat, the civilian armor I had worn for so long, the symbol of the person I used to pretend to be. I folded it neatly and placed it on a chair. It lay there, a soft, crumpled ghost of a past self. Beneath it was the crisp, immaculate uniform of the Aegis Biosolutions ceremonial dress whites, a custom-tailored suit that subtly incorporated the Institute's insignia, a symbol of my true allegiance and rank. I took a moment to adjust the fit, smoothing the fabric over my shoulders. Then, from a small velvet-lined box I took from my purse, I retrieved my rank insignia, a single, intricately designed gold helix, the symbol of a director, level scientist at Aegis. It was cool and heavy in my palm. This wasn't just about dressing for a ceremony. This was a silent, personal ritual. With slow, methodical movements, I affixed the helix to my lapel, each click of the pin into its fastening a decisive sound, a final confirmation. Click. This is who I am. Click. This is what I have earned. I was no longer just Anya Sharma, the quiet daughter. I was director-level scientist doctor. Anya Sharma, a leading mind in the most powerful bio-research institute in the world. I was dressing myself in the truth. When I stepped out of the waiting room and back into the designated VIP section, the atmosphere had changed. The seats were filling up, a sea of formal attire and distinguished scientists, a few senior researchers, a Nobel laureate I knew from joint projects, and the head of the National Cancer Institute spotted me. Their faces lit up with genuine recognition. "Dr. Sharma," the Nobel laureate said, extending his hand. "I heard Project Chimera was finally being declassified. A phenomenal piece of work. Congratulations and long overdue, Anya." The head of the National Cancer Institute added with a gruff, approving smile. "You and your team ran circles around them. We owe you one for that." Each handshake, each word of praise from these men and women. People who understood the sacrifices, who spoke the same language of science and innovation, was like a brick being laid in the foundation of my confidence. It was a stark, almost painful contrast to the cold, confused stares I could feel coming from the guest section. My family didn't know me, but these people, my peers, my colleagues, they knew. Their respect was a shield, a solid, impenetrable wall of validation that I would carry with me into the battle ahead. I took my assigned seat next to Dr. Reed, my back straight, my hands resting calmly in my lap. And then I allowed myself to feel it, the weight of their gaze from across the aisle. I didn't need to look to know they were staring. I could feel the intensity of it, a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, panicked confusion. I could picture the scene perfectly. My father leaning in, whispering urgently to my mother fanning herself with the ceremony program, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that was almost theatrical, and Rohan, I could feel his stare most of all. It was a focused, burning beam of bewilderment. He would be looking at the gold helix on my lapel. The impossible, incomprehensible truth of it. In his mind, the math wouldn't add up. The sister he had mocked just an hour ago, the boring lab rat, was wearing a rank that took most scientists a lifetime to achieve, if they ever did, and I met his gaze for a fraction of a second across the crowd, offering nothing more than a calm, polite, almost imperceptible nod. Then I turned my attention back to the stage. The game had begun, but for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't a pawn, sacrificed for the sake of the king. Today, I was the queen. And I was about to checkmate them all. My silence now was more powerful than any argument I could ever make. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet intake of breath before the truth was finally spoken aloud. The master of ceremonies, a distinguished professor with a voice as smooth as polished brass, stepped up to the podium. And now, for the presentation of the National Institutes of Health Clinical Excellence Award to Dr. Rohan Sharma, for meritorious service in patient care and clinical innovation, I watched, a silent observer in the front row, as my brother rose from his seat. He moved with the fluid, unshakable confidence of a man who has never had to question his place in the world, a man who has spent his entire life being told he was the hero of every story. He ascended the stage, accepted his medal with a practiced, humble dip of his head, and turned to the microphone as if he were born for the spotlight that now bathed him in a golden glow. His acceptance speech was flawless, a masterclass in charm and filial piety. He thanked the NIH for the incredible honor, his mentors for their steadfast leadership. Then he turned his charismatic gaze toward our family. "I want to thank my father, Dr. Vijay Sharma," he said, his voice ringing with a sincerity that could move mountains, "for teaching me what it means to be a true healer, for showing me the path of duty, compassion, and courage." He smiled at my mother, a warm, affectionate smile, and to my mother, Leela, for her unending support and prayers. He then gave a subtle, charming wink to his wife. And of course to my beautiful wife, Priya, for being my rock, my anchor in every storm. He paused then, a performer's trick, letting the weight of his gratitude settle over the room. His eyes swept across the audience, a king surveying his court. For a fraction of a second, his gaze passed directly over me, sitting in the front row of the VIP section. There was no recognition, no emotion, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. It was as if he were looking at a piece of furniture, a stranger, a seat filler. Then he continued, concluding his speech with a final patriotic flourish that earned him a thunderous, sustained applause. He never mentioned my name. In that very public, very deliberate omission, in front of hundreds of his peers and our nation's most respected medical leaders, he had made his final, definitive statement. "You do not exist." It was a deeper, more profound cut than any private insult ever could be. It was an erasure on a public record, a final declaration of my irrelevance. As he walked off the stage, soaking in the adoration, I felt the last faint flicker of any sisterly sentiment within me extinguish, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard clarity. And when the applause finally faded, Dr. Reed did not return to her seat. Instead, with a quiet purpose that immediately drew every eye in the room, she walked to the podium. The entire auditorium, a moment ago filled with sound, fell into a sudden, expectant silence. A director of Aegis Biosolutions going off script was an event in itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice commanding the air, a low rumble that needed no amplification to reach the furthest corners of the hall, "we have a special, unscheduled addition to today's ceremony. A recognition that, for paramount reasons of national security and public health, has been kept secret from the public until this very moment." A low, intrigued murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Rohan, now back in his seat, lean over and whisper to my father, a confused frown creasing his brow. Dr. Reed continued, her words painting a vivid picture for the captivated audience. We often, and rightly, honor the heroes we can see. The clinicians on the front lines, the surgeons in the operating rooms, the doctors in remote villages. But there is another kind of hero, one who serves in the deepest shadows of the world, one whose victories are not measured in patients seen, but in pandemics averted, in lives saved on a global scale. Their battlefield is a complex network of genetic codes, viral strains, and scientific breakthroughs. The air was now thick with anticipation. The audience was leaning forward in their seats, completely under her spell. Today, the director boomed, her voice resonating with a fierce pride. We have the distinct honor of finally recognizing the lead scientist and commander of the now declassified Project Chimera, one of the most successful and critically important biointelligence operations in the modern history of the Project Chimera, United States. I could hear my father's voice, a hoarse, confused rasp carrying across the aisle. Chimera? What the hell is Chimera? And then Dr. Reed's gaze lifted from the crowd, sweeping over the rows until it landed directly on me. She held my gaze, a spotlight in human form. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor and my personal privilege to ask her to the stage, Director, Level Scientist Dr. Anya Sharma. For a single, solitary heartbeat, there was nothing. Absolute, deafening silence. The world seemed to hang, suspended in a universe of stunned disbelief. And then, like a brush fire, a wave of whispers swept through the auditorium. Dr. Sharma? Did she say a director-level scientist? And I rose from my seat. And as I did, something extraordinary, something beautiful happened. Every single uniformed person in that room, from the youngest intern in the back rows to the most decorated clinicians and researchers in the front, rose to their feet as one. It wasn't planned. It wasn't coordinated. It was a reflex born of instinct, protocol, and a lifetime of ingrained discipline. It was respect. A cascading wave of white lab coats and dark suits standing in silent, stunned deference. All except for 3 people. My family remained seated, frozen in their chairs, as if a gorgon had turned them to stone. They were a tiny, isolated island of shock in a vast, rising sea of honor. My father's face was a mask of pure, slack-jawed incomprehension. My mother's hand was pressed hard against her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that was almost theatrical. And Rohan's face was ashen. The confident golden boy tan had vanished, replaced by a pale, sickly, almost green pallor. I walked toward the stage, each step steady, deliberate, confident. I could feel the weight of my own power, the quiet, immense authority I had carried in secret for so long. I was no longer a shadow. I was walking into the light. On the stage, Dr. Reed took the Presidential Medal for Scientific Innovation from its rich, velvet-lined box. As she pinned the prestigious medal to my uniform, she leaned in, her voice a low whisper meant only for me. Time to tell your story. Dr. Sharma. She turned back to the microphone. But she did not simply read the official, dry citation. She told the story. She spoke of the youngest director-level scientist in Aegis Biosolutions history, a ghost who had commanded a global biointelligence network from the deepest parts of the shadow world. She spoke of strategic victories that had averted regional pandemics, of intel that had directly saved the lives of over 5,000 civilians in a single year through rapid vaccine development and targeted antiviral therapies. She painted a picture of a new kind of warfare, fought not with guns, but with intellect, genetic sequencing, and predictive modeling. And then she delivered the final, devastating, perfectly aimed blow. And just last year, she said, her voice ringing with emphasis, with purpose, it was actionable intelligence gathered and analyzed in real time by Dr. Sharma's unit that directly resulted in a new, highly effective treatment protocol being deployed. saving thousands of lives from a catastrophic, coordinated antibiotic-resistant bacterial outbreak in the very hospitals where many of our esteemed clinicians serve. I let my eyes drift from the director, from the cheering crowd, to my family, and I watched the truth detonate in their faces. My father looked like he had been physically struck, his body rigid, his eyes seeing something far away, replaying a history he never knew. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her knuckles white where her hand was pressed to her lips. But it was Rohan's face I will remember for the rest of my life. The blood drained from it completely. The confusion was gone, replaced by a sickening, horrifying dawn of absolute comprehension. And he knew exactly which bacterial outbreak that was. It was the one he had been publicly lauded for containing, the one that had almost overwhelmed his own hospital. The applause felt like a distant ocean roar. Standing on that stage, with the weight of the medal on my chest and the respect of my peers surrounding me, I felt a sense of quiet, profound release. The battle was over. The truth was out. At the reception that followed, a grand ballroom filled with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of important conversations, I was no longer a shadow. I was a center of gravity. A group of senators from the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee were congratulating me when I saw them approach. My family. They moved together like a wounded animal, a tight, defensive cluster, cutting through the crowd. Rohan was in the lead. His handsome face a hard, tight mask of fury. My father followed, his expression unreadable, a complex mixture of shock and something I couldn't yet name. My mother trailed behind, clutching my father's arm, her face pale and drawn. They stopped a few feet away. The senators, sensing the sudden drop in temperature, politely excused themselves. Rohan didn't wait for them to be out of earshot. "Dr. Sharma," he said, his voice a low, venomous hiss. He spat the title like it was a curse. That was quite a performance, wasn't it? My father remained silent, his eyes for the first time refusing to meet mine. "And you lied to us," Rohan continued, his voice rising, drawing a few curious glances. "You lied to all of us for 15 years. You let us believe you were nothing, a failure. And then you stood by and let me lecture you about patient care, about public health. You were laughing at me the whole time, weren't you?" He spun to face me, his eyes wild with a wounded pride I knew all too well. It was the Sharma pride, the pride of the renowned clinician. "I was on the front lines," he shouted, jabbing a finger at his own chest. "Dad was on the front lines. We served patients directly. And you sat in a goddamn air-conditioned lab, playing with cells on a computer. And you get a medal bigger than both of ours combined. It's a joke. It's insulting." His words were a desperate, frantic attempt to rebuild the pedestal he had just been knocked from. He wasn't angry that I had lied. He was angry that I was more successful than he was. He was angry that my lab job had saved his life, and perhaps his public reputation. I let him vent. I let the storm of his ego break against the calm, silent fortress I had become. I walked over to a nearby table, poured a glass of water from a crystal pitcher, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I waited until his shouting subsided into ragged, heavy breaths. Only then did I speak. My voice was quiet, devoid of any emotion, as flat and calm as a still lake. "I was never laughing at you, Rohan," I said, setting the glass down with a soft click. "I was doing my job, a job that, by its very nature, required absolute secrecy." I shifted my gaze from him to my father. For the first time, he looked me in the eye, his own gaze filled with a complex mix of shock and dawning understanding. "And did you ever once ask me about the specifics of my work, Dad?" I asked, my voice still quiet, still controlled. "Or did you just assume it was playing with petri dishes because it didn't involve a stethoscope?" I turned to my mother, who was now weeping silently into a handkerchief, her carefully constructed composure utterly shattered. "Did you ever once ask me if I was happy with my career, Mom? Or did you just ask me when I was going to get married?" I looked back at all of them, the jury of my childhood. I didn't lie to anyone. I simply stopped trying to explain myself to people who had already decided they weren't going to listen. My words hung in the air, a final, damning verdict. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. My father, the indomitable Dr. Vijay Sharma, seemed to shrink before my eyes. He bowed his head, and in that moment, for the first time in my life, he looked old. He looked defeated, and just then, the sharp, distinct ring of my encrypted satellite phone cut through the silence. It was a sound that meant only one thing: duty calls. I glanced at the screen, then back at the shattered remains of my family. "I have to take this," I said, my voice crisp and professional again. "It's a call I can't miss." I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, my back to them. I allowed one last, small piece of my old self to speak. "I love you," I said, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "But I will not be dismissed by you ever again. If we are going to have a relationship from this day forward, it will be one that starts with respect. Real respect." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, a final, non-negotiable term of surrender. "Think about it." And then I walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind me, leaving them alone in the echoing silence of the truth. 6 months passed, 6 months of careful, tentative steps across a newly drawn map. My ultimatum at the ceremony wasn't a finish line. It was a starting line for a different kind of relationship, one I wasn't sure my family was capable of running. I walked into my parents' living room on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The first thing I noticed was something new against the far wall. A beautiful, glass-fronted display cabinet made of dark cherry wood. My father was there, a soft cloth in his hand, carefully polishing the glass. His own awards and my grandfather's were arranged tastefully on the lower shelves. But in the center, on the main shelf at eye level, sat my Presidential Medal for Scientific Innovation. It was flanked by a framed high-resolution photograph of me on the stage at the NIH, with Dr. Reed pinning the medal to my uniform. My mother came in from the kitchen, carrying a plate of her classic chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven. She smiled at me, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "Your father built that last month," she said softly. "He said it was the first time the Sharma family display case told the whole story of service. Not just the story of the clinicians, not a story of public versus private, just service." It was a small change in wording, a subtle shift in the family narrative, but it felt as significant as the moving of a continent. That evening, dinner was different. The air was lighter. The usual performance was gone. There were no exaggerated clinical anecdotes, no bravado. Instead, my father, after clearing his throat, looked at me across the dinner table. "Anya," he began, testing the name out, "what are the biggest challenges you face with personnel management at Aegis? With that many high-level scientists and researchers, the politics must be complex." It was a real question, a question born of genuine curiosity. Later, Rohan talked about a new risk analysis protocol he was implementing in his hospital. "It's funny," he said, "not quite meeting my eye. Some of the principles. I feel like I learned them from somewhere." He chanced a quick glance at me, a shy, almost embarrassed smile touching his lips. It was his way of acknowledging my world, of admitting its value, without having to say the words directly. And then my mother raised her wine glass. "A toast," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Not to the men of the family, but to the strength and intelligence of all the Sharma children, in all their forms." We all clinked glasses. The oppressive, competitive tension that had defined every family meal I could remember was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile but very real warmth. After dinner, Rohan and I found ourselves on the old wooden swing on the back porch, a place where we'd spent countless childhood summer evenings. For a long time, we just sat in a comfortable silence, listening to the chirping of the crickets. He was the one who spoke first, his voice low and devoid of its usual arrogance. "I'm sorry, Anya," he said, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line at the edge of the yard. "The way I treated you, the things I said about your work, it was never about you. It was about me." He took a shaky breath. "I needed to be the hero. I needed it to feel like I was living up to Dad's expectations, to the family name. I was so insecure that I couldn't stand to see that you had found your own way, a way that I didn't understand." His confession was a balm, a healing medicine for a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. And I felt a real smile. A genuine, unforced smile spread across my face. "Thank you for saying that, Rohan," I said softly. I looked out at the yard, at the fireflies beginning to blink in the twilight. For the longest time, I thought I needed this family's approval to feel whole. I thought my value was something you all had to give me. I placed a hand over my own heart. But all those years of being misunderstood, they taught me something more important. My worth isn't determined by anyone else. It's right here. It always was. Rohan nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on his face. "I'm really proud to be your brother, Anya. And for the first time, I could say it and mean it with every fiber of my being. And I'm proud to be your sister." The peace I felt in that moment wasn't a victory. It was something better. It was acceptance. It was a dawn I had made for myself. Director-level scientist doctor. Anya Sharma's journey is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never determined by others. Perhaps her story brought to mind a moment in your own life, a time you had to draw a line in the sand, or when you realized your peace of mind was non-negotiable. We believe those moments deserve to be honored. If you've ever felt like Anya, let us know in the comments below. For more stories that empower and validate, subscribe to Chosen Revenge, where a new story is always waiting to honor yours. Your experience matters here.